Welcome back to Beyond Well. I'm Sheila Hamilton. I'm here with Dr. Brian Goff. Hello, Brian.
Hello, Sheila.
And Dr. Jenna Lejeune. Hello,
Hi.
Jenna.
So nice to see you both.
Today, our guests, Dan Devaney, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. And after high school, Dan earned a football scholarship to the University of Oregon. Go Ducks.
Go Ducks.
Hello, Dan.
Good morning. Thank you.
Do you still make the O pretty well with your fingers like that?
Yeah, with the fingers that aren't bent. I can do that.
Yeah,
You gotta
that's
make a
right.
circle.
Dan made his way to the counseling field in addiction and substance abuse after his own journey as an addict and alcoholic. And Dan also suffered from depression and suicidal ideation. And thank you in advance, Dan, for sharing this story. I think it's super, super important.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Of course, it takes practice talking about it. So I'm excited for this morning.
Cool. And Taj Dashuan. Taj, I don't want to give it the French thing. Taj Dashawn. There we go, right?
You got it. Taj Deshawn.
Okay.
You got it.
Taj Deshawn is a former Division I college football player for Stony Brook University. And after playing his last game of football, Taj struggled with depression. He'd never fully developed a clear vision for his life after the game. And after several years of stumbling around in the dark, Taj began to take his eyes off of himself and focus on serving others, which is what he's doing now, running an intensive program for retired athletes who are struggling to adapt to life after sports. Taj, super cool of you to be with us today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've become a fan of the show ever since Dan introduced me to Beyond Well. So I'm excited to come on and share with you all.
Spread it around.
Oh, great.
What area of the country are you living in now, Taj?
I am in San Diego. Well, currently I'm in the Inland Empire with my folks right now. But,
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so
I want
in California.
to talk with you first, Taj, if you don't mind, just because you're on the phone and Dan is here in studio and we have a little better eye contact with him, just so that we can kind of focus on your story. Do you know, were you aware that you were getting so dark and so, and your emotions were getting so dragged down after you completed your football realm?
I think maybe subconsciously I knew. Obviously, it's one of those things where hindsight is 20/20, and as I look back, I'm like, wow, I was pretty messed up. As I was going through it, I didn't have the tools to be able to cope with it. And Dan knows this. I'm sure Dan will get into this in his story also. But the thing with me was I was just doing the best I could given the tools that I had, meaning I was just I had an extended college, essentially. When I came back home, I was doing the same things that I was doing in school, just continuing to go out with the guys and drink. A lot of us were unemployed. So to answer your question, I really had no idea how bad it was because I was living in a fog and I was under the influence of a lot of drugs and alcohol and a lot of binge watching Netflix at the time. So
I want to just bring in Dr. Lejeune and Dr. Goff right now, because one of the things that I often hear from people is it's only when they're sober and it's only when they recover that they look back and say, wow, I was in so much trouble. I have no idea how I was stumbling around and people didn't put me on a gurney and put me to the ER.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people end up drinking or drugs or what have you, or even binge watching Netflix as a way to avoid discomfort, right? That's why people do it, is because it works.
Yeah.
And so it's really only when you stop doing that stuff that you realize, like, oh, reality is relentless. It's still here,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think I have such respect for people who can make those big changes in their life, and stop using or drinking in those ways. Because what's going to happen when you stop is things are going to get a lot worse, or you're going to feel a lot worse.
Right.
Because, as Brian said, these ways that we learn how to avoid the painful or scary thoughts or feelings that we have, they work in the short run. They don't work in the long run, but they work in the short run.
Yeah.
That's right. I've often said to people, you do it because it works, and you come talk to me about it because it doesn't.
Right,
And
exactly.
both things are true.
Both are true.
I want to bring in Dan because, Dan, you not only went through addiction, through alcoholism, then you went through addiction, then you got so deep that you were actually suicidal several times. And so there must have been a point where you actually were aware of just how sick you'd become.
Yeah. And what Taj said is, Yeah, when we hang up the cleats and then we don't have that connection and we don't have the structure, and all that disappears, and then you go to drugs and alcohol, that's the part where, like, for a long time I didn't know what I was going through. But I call it the perfect storm. And yeah, so that at the very end, Sheila, I was scared, but I also was at that point that it's really hard to describe or articulate to people who have not gone through it. But that dark spot where the insides of your body, you don't have that hope. It just goes away. And until I found some people who, I don't know, 1 minute at a time at the beginning, that's how it started. It was like I reconnected with some guys who were willing to just show me love, and 1 minute, one day, that's how it started. But yeah, it's hard to see when you're going through it. But I did know at the end, it's not normal to go to the ER 19 times in 30 days or be homeless in Bend, Oregon when it's 5 degrees, or none of it was making sense, but I didn't know how to get out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
What was your relationship with your family like at that time?
Literally none, because of I've talked about we hide out in our addiction, and the guilt and shame is just too much. People ask me that a lot. Why didn't you call your brother? That's the last person I was going to call. Yeah.
Do you think that there's something inherent in the way that we really prop up athletes as being the be-all, end-all example of who every young boy wants to be, that is problematic in that it's such a false ideology to begin with, and then when you take that uniform off, it's almost as if that entire persona is stripped away.
Yeah. No, that's it right there, and Taj can, I'm sure, back it up. But once I didn't know who I was when 1986, Corvallis, hung up the cleats, we beat the Beavers, walked out of there with my helmet, a jersey, and a game ball, and it took a long time to even know that I was going through that loss of identity. Yeah.
Taj, what are you talking to, especially young athletes that are trying to prepare themselves for the steps they'll need to make once they're not working anymore, about some of the things that they can do to ensure they have a sense of self, to ensure that they have the steps to be able to continue on after sports?
Yeah, it's one of those things, kind of like Dan said, that it's tricky to navigate those waters, because when you're so immersed in that bubble of sport, especially when you're playing at an elite level, and most of us have been playing since, we were knee high before we even hit puberty. I like to say a lot of us were raised by the game. It's one of those things where there's only so much you can say. Unfortunately, there's only so much you can say to an athlete who is still immersed in that world, because I'll give you an example. When I first started, I was, doing a lot of speaking to current athletes. But the thing is, as soon as I'm done speaking, they're going right back into practice, right back into film. Their entire focus is on, game time. So a lot of my focus these days is on athletes who are already done playing, or, they just played their last season. Maybe they're still on campus, or they've already graduated and they're out into the real world, or maybe someone who had a short professional contract overseas, or whatever the case may be, and they're now trying to figure out the next steps about what they're going to do with the rest of their life. But to answer your question, it's one of those things where, and Dan and I experienced this firsthand, it's one of those things where unless someone is literally on your case about it, talking to you, you almost have to have like a one-on-one person who can be like, listen, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do. At the same time, it's a catch-22, because you don't know until you get out and start experiencing things like, oh, I don't like this, or I do want to do this. A lot of athletes may think that they have an idea for what they want to do after they're done. For example, sales. A lot of athletes think, I'm just going to go into sales once I'm done playing because I'm a competitor. And then they find themselves down the road not being motivated to go into these jobs because they have no passion or no interest about what they're selling. And that's a tough transition to go from, playing in front of a sold-out stadium or arena, and now you're sitting in a cubicle being forced to make $200 a day to sell products you don't really care about. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah, well, it certainly does. I really want to bring in Dr. Goff and Dr. Lejeune, because I can imagine that the fall for people who have public adulation are paid. You're not paid that much at the collegiate level. They should be paid more, if you want my personal opinion. But at the pro level, in particular, they're paid millions and tens of millions of dollars to perform this thing for people, and then the crowds go away. And as Dan mentioned, out maybe the career is only 3 to 5 years at max, and they might be left also with brain injuries that contribute to everything else. I can imagine the fall is worse for people who've had that high level of exposure than for someone who never really depended upon that kind of public adulation. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, and I think it probably isn't so much just about money, for example. I think it's more about, are we putting people in a particular role? Are we seeing them as almost like this caricature of a person? And we certainly do that to high-level athletes, whether they're college or pro. And Taj, I think this is something you were speaking to. You said, like, you didn't even have any sense of what you were interested in because nobody had sort of talked to you about that outside of the game. And I think that is what happens to folks who get in these roles where we sort of see you as this, you're sort of this role, this caricature of a person. You're not a real person. And then the way that human beings learn about who we are as individuals is we have people like pay attention to us and ask us human questions like, what is it that you like? What are you interested in? How do you feel? And I don't think we tend to do that with people who we want to keep in these very sort of like on a pedestal because once you start becoming a real human being, then I have to start paying attention to things like, oh, and you're depressed, or and you're being harmed by this, and all of these things that kind of ruin the nice little wonderful image we have.
Yeah, we certainly don't have the music to put behind what you just said.
Yes.
The rah,
right.
rah,
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just way more nuanced.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it must be like to perform in front of a stadium of people, whether it's a professional athlete or a musician or something like that. I mean, it must be an incredible high. But what Jenna's saying is sort of about identity. And how do I conceive of myself? There is this issue of how do we view these people? They're not a person. They're number 8, or they're the football player, or they're the basketball player. But it's also the way that we define ourselves.
Absolutely.
And, one of the things that I've noted is people will say, "So what do you do?" Which is a verb question, right? And how do we answer? We say, "I am a." That's a noun answer. So we, what do you do is how do you spend your time, or how do you pay the rent, or what do you enjoy? And then we answer with, this is who I am. I am a psychologist, or I am a football player. And when those things are taken from you because somebody comes up who's better, in the professional world, there's like an influx of talent all the time, or you blow out your knee, or in college you graduate, or you get one too many concussions and you're done. Or you release an album and then that was kind of it. And there's no sophomore album to back it up. That it feels like, well, who am I now? Because I thought I was a blank, as opposed to I am this human being. And these are these things that I care about. These are these things that I enjoy. These are these things that sort of feed me.
And I think it's particularly hard for prodigies, whether you're an athlete prodigy or a musical prodigy, who start very, very young with this, because we learn, Brian and I, in the way that we talk about this, we think of selfing as this verb. It's something that we do. We create this sense of self, right? And we learn how to do that from being a very little kid with people asking us questions and then kind of us figuring it out. But if you're just a little kid who all people are seeing is, oh, you're this amazing athlete, or you're this amazing pianist, or whatever it is, you don't even learn how to be able to do that. So that when you are an adult, of course, what you know is, well, I'm a ball player.
And then you're a retired ball player.
And then you're
a long retired ball player. Dan, you mentioned that you found comfort in other people being able to hear your story and ask who you really were. Was it other football players, or was it just other people who have also struggled?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. So I had somebody ask me one time, is it easier because you have Walter Bailey in your life? And he's an ex-football player, paid for the Huskies, and he's really been my peer support guy.
Yeah.
And it is easier because Walter played college, and that's why Taj and I have connected. That's who we are and were, but it's really the peer part of anything, I think, with, like you said, with musicians or actors or anybody that's trying to find themselves again. I think people who have gone through it, like I have, can help those people.
It seems like it would take less translation or less
Totally.
explanation.
Yeah, it's just like war veterans. They really, really want to be around other people who've
Absolutely.
experienced the intensity of what they've
Exactly.
experienced.
And
right?
let me just note that, on the topic of we aren't what we do, I just want to note that a duck and a husky are friends.
Yeah, it is good. Everybody loves that
That's
part.
evidence. That's evidence right there.
Yeah, and I didn't tease them this year about the game.
Okay, what I want to know is how open are you guys about the dangers of CTE? How familiar are young people now when they're going into the game that they need to be protecting their brains, and what your guess is about how closely aligned this severe depression and CTE is? And either of you can start. Dan, do you have thoughts on that, or you want to hear Taj first?
Go for it, Taj.
Taj, you first then.
Okay. To be honest with you, I try not to speak too much about CTE only because I don't have the science or the data to back it up. Obviously, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not even sure if it's an officially diagnosable disease at this point, right? And the thing about it is, I think this is conversations I've had with people who are very deep into that research, is that they want to be very careful with saying, okay, this person has CTE, or diagnosing someone with CTE, because it can kind of give someone this hopeless feeling where they, because it's a degenerative disease, and this person can be like, oh, I have CTE, my life is over, there's no help for me, I might as well just end it.
Sure.
Versus other forms of treatment which are available, which you guys know all about. I don't have to tell you about that.
Yeah.
I will say, I think the fact that it's even a topic of discussion obviously is a good thing. People can say what they want about the game of football being softer now. And, I get mad at some of the calls too, especially as a DB. I see some of these calls and I'm like, oh, come on, let's let them play, At the same time, part of me is glad that, this discussion is happening and people are more aware of it, so that they understand the risks associated with the game. And, there's more data and more information coming out about it, and things are being done to protect the players. So
I think you make great points there, Taj. It's the same issue that I have around telling somebody at the age of 50 that they have early dementia. Like, yes, there's some things that you can do, but really won't it in many ways take away that person's hope and that person's joy for living? I really worry about these diagnosable tools. Like, how do we know how it's going to express? One brain is different than another brain, so we don't know. What are your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I just watched the Aaron Hernandez Netflix special.
Yeah.
All the guys that are dying that have done, they've donated their brain, or they've looked at them, they all have it. But just because you have CTE doesn't mean everybody's going to go out and commit crime. And,
right.
But it's super real. I'm glad we're talking about it. It's almost like suicide. It's really sometimes tough for people to talk about. I honestly think it's going to be the next little epidemic among us. It's just they seem to be finding it in almost everyone that has donated their brain.
Yeah. So if you could have, the kind of work that you and Taj are doing now, especially with athletes who have retired, if you could transfer that to young athletes in terms of taking care of their entire bodies, taking care of their minds, taking care of their brains, would a young testosterone-filled athlete even be prepared to take on so much information? Because one of the reasons I think young stars are really good is because they're so compartmentalized. They're so uber focused on just winning and nothing else.
Yeah. When I watch football with friends or family, there's a lot of people that go, oh, this isn't football anymore, because they won't let them come in and lead first with their helmet. But the young ones, I don't know what I would say if I was a mother. I just know that would be a tough decision to make. But as a man that growing up, that sports gave me, so much connection and so much meaning in terms of, I loved it. I don't know. I can't imagine not playing sports when I was young, especially football. But it's a tough one. I think that everybody's trying to make it safer for the players.
Yeah.
And that's all we can do.
The good news about it's not football anymore is that most of the young kids who want to play football, their history goes back about 5 years.
Right.
So, so many people are attracted to playing for the Ducks because of their tradition of winning. And I'm thinking like, really? Tradition of winning?
Right. What are you talking about?
Are your Ducks different than my Ducks?
Yeah, I get it.
Because my memory goes back further. So if we change the game to make it safer, in not too long a time, that won't be the new soft game. That'll just be the game.
Yeah.
And I think, Sheila, your point about these are young kids whose brains haven't fully developed.
Yeah.
It's not their responsibility to be able to sort of put that limit on themselves. It's our responsibility as a culture and kind of the coaches and parents and all of that stuff to be able to say, hey, here's a way. We want you to have the experience of sport. And Dan, you keep using this word connection, which I think is so important, like the ability to find a tribe, to be able to connect with other people is so essential, and including essential for brain development. But here's the way we're going to help you do that in a way that isn't super risky. It's exactly the same thing with cars. Driving a car is unbelievably risky. And so we do the sort of thing and we tell our kids, yeah, and you're going to have to wear a seatbelt if we choose to have you drive in a car. We don't say you're not allowed to drive in cars anymore.
Right, yeah. We give them training and help them understand
absolutely.
all the way along.
But we don't put it on them like, gosh, well, you made the choice. Oh, well, you know.
Yeah.
I want to talk with you, Taj and Dan, both about the increase in suicide, especially among males. There's been a 36% increase in suicide in just the last 10 years, especially among middle-aged men. And I want you, because especially you, Dan, you're working in a sober living community. You've seen the people who are going through these really, really deep depressions and despair. What are the factors that are happening now versus, I don't know, when we grew up that's causing this crisis in suicide?
Yeah, I ask myself that a lot. Yeah, I work for Cascade Sober Living, and I took that job because, as Jenna mentioned, connection. That's connection and community for me are like number one, number two. And that's actually why, Taj and I are on this call together. I don't know why, but I do know that when I see the population that I work with is drugs and alcohol, and then we have mental health, and then so for me, I think Taj can relate too, and some of the guys that I work with in the sober living community, there's kind of a perfect storm going on.
It's all of it, right?
Yeah. So I can't pick one or the other. And every time I hear someone ask those questions and really, if I wasn't to share publicly what I think, I just go back to, God, everybody's on so much medication. I see guys that are coming off their medication and then they feel, because they think they feel better. And then they go back they kind of go to a downside again. You're doctors, you could probably describe a little more of that. But the medication, but the age group, it's just so hard, I think, when you get to a certain age. For me, I was so tired. I heard a young man last night. I had to go to a meeting at one of our houses, and one guy asked him why he was what's different this time. He goes, "Oh, I'm just tired of it." And for me, I was like, "Oh, you have no idea. You're 20 years old. You have no idea what tired means." And I think when you get to this middle age, we're not bulletproof like we used to be.
Right.
Taj, do you have other thoughts? Because I completely see a lot of heads nodding here to that.
Yeah, I think what Dan said is perfect. And it's interesting that, obviously Dan works with addiction and is now with Hey Catch working with athletes. And I've been working with athletes for some time now. And I see the parallels with the increase in suicide and, athletes struggling. And I think it comes down to isolation, like Dan was saying earlier. If we're talking specifically about men, I think, of course, there's this whole stigma that men, especially athletes, have to be tough and can't open up and talk about what they're experiencing, which obviously I experience, which Dan experienced, a lot of isolation because you feel like no one's going to be able to relate. I don't want to look weak. I don't want to look soft. I have to have this image that I have it all figured out and I'm not hurting. So I'm just going to internalize it, which leads to a lot of suffering, which leads to a lot of people feeling like they're alone, which unfortunately eventually leads to suicide.
Yeah.
So,
I think the point both of you are making is just so important. And maybe the more important question, or at least the easier question to answer, isn't what's causing the increase in suicide, but rather what can we do in response to the increased rate in suicide? Because if you think about it, just think about the analogy. What causes a headache? Well, there are a billion different factors that can cause a headache. And we know that taking Tylenol can help with a headache. It's not a lack of Tylenol that's causing the headache. It's just Tylenol helps with headaches. It's sort of simple that way. And
You sure it's not a Tylenol deficiency?
it's not a Tylenol deficiency disorder. No.
There we go.
But if we think about suicide and we kind of get into this argument about all these different factors, of course there are many factors that are involved in the increase in suicide. And yet we know connection and community are two things that will absolutely decrease the rate of suicide.
Yeah.
We just know that.
Yeah.
And so if we work on that end of things, then I think we're going to get more bang for our buck with
And
it.
can I say connection and community that's, I'm going to sound old when I say this, but real connection and community, not the social media.
Oh, no.
Of
Yeah.
course.
We're talking old school.
I would think, absolutely, face-to-face or person-to-person.
Somebody who sees you,
that's right.
like the real person.
The whole you.
The whole you. Yep.
I think that's so important. I also don't want to gloss over that, this increase has occurred at the same time that our dispensation of pharmaceutical drugs has gone up by 100%. And general physicians give it for everything from cramps to mild depression to and we still don't have good data to say that any of this helps prevent or stop or alleviate the suffering of the people who are taking it. And that's what I think is the most important thing to say about the plethora of drugs that people are on, is there's not great science to say that it's worked. In fact, we have more morbidity. We have more people who are very, very sick and disabled that are on these drugs than before we started dispensing them. That's all that we can say is look at the science, look at the data, and then try to figure out where we land. What Jenna's point is, but we do know connection works.
We do know that works.
No, that's huge.
Plenty of evidence about that.
When I was 10 months sober, I actually was misdiagnosed with ALS in Bend, Oregon.
Oh, my gosh.
And literally, my life, that's how come I think really I've been able to, really turn the corner, is at the moment when I was going through it, I couldn't understand it, but it was a gift from God to live one day at a time. And it's still the way I do it every day now. But that 6 months of everybody had a pill for me.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't take them anymore. I don't take anything. But what Jenna was talking about just got me fired up because connection and that's what Taj and I are going to do. And that's what we're going to do with Hey Catch. We're all going to work together to do what you just talked about.
That's right.
Oh,
Old
that's
school,
super
like
cool.
Brian said, people are going to come together and we're going to talk and we're going to play catch. Literally playing catch can change things. You don't really, it's just a way of eating when you're communicating. But that's when she kind of got into the solution, I could see I
Super
get a little
excited.
antsy. Yeah, I'm like,
You know what else I
Let's
love
go do
about
that.
it is that
Do that.
it has all of that sort of vagus nerve stimulation where you're doing one thing again
yeah, and you
again.
can mess
and you're
with the guy at
moving
the
it
other
through your
end.
body.
And
Yeah,
it's just really good communication.
Really beautiful.
Yeah.
Taj, I know that and I wish you could have been here in studio because it felt like we had our own nice connection today. But do you have anything else that you want to add about how people find you, what they do to come together with either Catch or the organization that you run today for retired athletes?
Sure. So you can find me at tajdeshawn.com, Taj Deshawn on LinkedIn. There's a place actually on my website under Get Coaching or under Contact where you can actually schedule time to speak with me. A lot of times what ends up happening is sometimes people, and you all know this, you're professionals, but sometimes people just need someone to talk to because they feel like they can't open up to their family or whatever, or no one understands what they're going through who's not a former athlete. Also, just really quickly, something I ran into is that even the other former athletes who I was in communication with, people who played at different schools or people from my hometown, we weren't able to help each other because we were all suffering. So we all need someone to talk to who's been through it and gone through the other side. A lot of times people don't even necessarily need to join my program in order to get the help. Sometimes they just need to open up about what they're going through. But anyway, you can reach out to me on my website. What else? LinkedIn, obviously, Instagram. I'm Taj Deshawn on all those platforms. I would encourage anyone listening, by the way, especially if you're a former athlete or just anyone in general, to really get on LinkedIn. If you're looking to figure out your next steps, LinkedIn is a very underrated. A lot of people think of it as like a recruiting platform, but it's an actively growing social network to where you can go on there and find connections for any industry you're looking to get your foot in the door.
That's super good because we really didn't touch on this, which I think is so important. It is important to work, and it's important to have meaningful work, right? And if that part is lacking in your life, then the rest of it, even if you have great connection, can feel like it's not the complete pie.
For sure, yeah. That was the part which Dan can also attest to, I'm sure, but that was the part that was really difficult for me after football was over. And I knew I wasn't going to the NFL, so I can only imagine for people who have played professionally or had high hopes of going to the next level. I knew I wasn't going to play at the next level, and I still struggled with the transition after football. And one of the hardest things was not knowing what I was going to do next, because I went from knowing my place in the world to having this purpose to having no clue what I was going to do, no clue what I was interested in. So like you said, Sheila, it's having something that you can wake up every day and apply yourself to and keep improving upon is vitally important, not just for athletes, but for everyone.
Really cool. And Dan, for you, sober living, super cool that you're doing. Is that a day job for you now?
Yeah.
Wow.
Hold on. Taj, can you tell them, I love it when you tell them about how you named it Thrive After Sports.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. So when people would ask me how I was doing, after I was playing football, like in the like middle of my dark period when I was drinking and isolated and all that, people would say, "Hey, Taj, how you doing, man?" "Oh, I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to get by." And eventually, once I started to come out of that, I had this shift where I was like, I'm going to stop saying that because I'm keeping my place in survival mode. I'm keeping my mind in this place where I'm just trying to survive. So I said, I'm going to go from surviving to thriving. And I actually named my program and my podcast Thrive After Sports. It's a play on life after sports because I want all athletes that I'm working with or that I come across or anyone who listens to the podcast to be able to thrive after sports, in their life after sports.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Dan, for you, where are people going to find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where Taj and I hooked up.
Yeah.
Friends of friends. You can find me at CascadeSoberLiving.com. Hey Catch is underway at the moment. We do have Facebook and social media. So Hey Catch is up and coming. Walter and I are doing that. It's going to be super fun. We're going to have the ability to have guys like Taj and one of his kind of peers that went to Stony Brook. Leo Sullivan's going to help us, Bridget Case. So you can find me at heycatch.com. But right now I'm working, my day job's Cascade Sober Living. But I'm also, I'm a certified alcohol and drug counselor, certified recovery mentor. I could throw you my phone number on here, but
You might not want to do
if,
that
yeah,
because
if
this goes all
somebody
over the
needs
world.
help, I'm not, somebody will, if somebody needed something, they can reach me through any of those. And we're like 24/7.
That's so
that's
wonderful.
what I'm doing.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Dan, Delaney, and Taj Deshawn, thanks again for being with us, you guys. Really so proud of what you're doing. It's very, very cool.
Thank you.
Sheila.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, and our program is brought to us by the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care and Cedar Hills Hospital, where lots of people go to start their sober living journey. Make it a great day.
Yeah.